Hi, today's lesson will go over extended metaphors. Now, you may be familiar with similes and metaphors, but have you ever heard of extended metaphors? Well, this lesson will cover just that. First, let's review what a metaphor is. A metaphor is a figure of speech comparing two things that are not alike but do have something in common. The words like or as are not used because that would signal a simile. Here are some examples of metaphors. He is a shining star. I am a breath of light. The classroom was a zoo. My sister is a night owl. You are my sunshine. The world is a stage. And the last one, I'm sure you've probably heard of it, that's a famous metaphor from William Shakespeare. But as I was reading aloud these metaphors, were you able to imagine what was being compared to what? For example, the classroom was a zoo. Classroom is being compared to a zoo. How would that type of classroom look like? Would it be disciplined or chaotic? The use of metaphors is to help readers imagine what the writer is trying to say, and it just brings the writing to life. So definitely get to know all the figurative language terms and implement what you've learned into your own writing. It would just help you as a writer. Anyway, let's go over what an extended metaphor is. Well, it's a metaphor, but it extends or stretches the comparison, takes it up a notch, goes on a tangent with the comparison, and it elaborates further. So just taking the idea of a metaphor and just extending it and just going into detail, further elaboration on that metaphor, comparing the two things. Why don't we practice? Let's practice with a poem by Emily Dickinson. If you're not familiar, she is a famous poet during her time. An interesting fact was she used to write her poems on little notes and send them to her family and friends. And after her death, her family and friends put together all her notes and letters, and that's when the world knew about her. This is one of her popular poems. Hope is a thing with feathers. So I will read this poem aloud. And as I do, I want you to identify the metaphor, and then we will delve deeper into the extended metaphor. Hope is a thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never, in extremity, it asked a crumb of me. Take a moment to figure out the metaphor. What is hope being compared to? Well, the first line kind of gives it away. Hope is the thing with feathers, but when animal goes or has feathers, that would be a bird. So the metaphor is hope compared to a bird, but Emily goes on a tangent and she continues with this metaphor, which becomes an extended metaphor. So let's take a look at the first stanza. Hope is a thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. What is Emily saying about hope? And why is it being compared to a bird? Well, look at the phrases that I've highlighted. So, hope is a thing with feathers, so it's the bird that perches in the soul. So, when you have hope and it just stays in your soul, in your being, it's always present, it never stops, it's always there. It sings the tune without the words. So, this is her extended metaphor. Let's practice again. This time we will look into a text. This is an excerpt from Simplexity by Jeffrey Kluger. Before we dive into this text, I do want to provide the context. Jeffrey Kluger, if you're not aware, writes books and articles on science topics. And for this particular piece, the context is about 9/11 in the Twin Towers, how people were asked to evacuate. And he just talks and addresses about how people's behavior during the evacuation, the simple process becomes something complex. And this gets into that. So now I'm going to read this snippet for you. And as I'm reading, I want you to figure out the metaphor and the extended metaphor. So, what does he compare people evacuating to? So, let me read this passage. The best way to understand the elaborate manner in which people move en masse may be to understand the equally complex way water does the same, particularly how it navigates around obstacles or breakwaters. A founder boat or a tumbled boulder in the middle of a rushing river turns even the most powerful current chaotic, reallocating its energy into increased swirling and churning and decreased velocity. When people are fleeing a building, a similar kind of chaos can be a very good thing. Designers of interior spaces have found that a perfectly useless post positioned along the path to a fire exit may actually help people escape. Give evacuees storming toward a doorway a little something to avoid, and you stagger their arrival slightly, allowing them to stream through the opening in a reasonably controlled flow, rather than colliding at once and causing a pileup. The obstacle keeps you at the top of the complexity arc, preventing you from plunging headlong to the frozen end. Take a moment to take in what I have read. Remember, we are finding the metaphor. He is comparing people evacuating to what? And if you figured it out, I've underlined the first part of the sentence. And he compares people evacuating the way water does the same. This is a metaphor. But if we take a deeper look, we can see that he provides further elaboration and examples to indicate that it's an extended metaphor. Can you find that? So he's using water, and how does he extend that metaphor? Let's take a look. So I've highlighted examples of the extended metaphor by the author. So remember, he's talking about people evacuating and how they evacuate is very similar to water. And he goes on a tangent. He talks about a rushing river turns even the most powerful current chaotic, reallocating its energy into increased swirling and churning and decreased velocity. So again, he compares how people evacuate like a rushing river, how it's chaotic. It reallocates its energy, and that's very similar to when people are fleeing a building. It's a similar kind of chaos. And he just talks about how people escape through a fire exit and how if there are obstacles, it kind of helps them to stream like a water or river, to have a controlled flow like a water or river. And these are examples of the extended metaphor. Let's review some concepts. So again, an extended metaphor extends or stretches a comparison. With the example of the rubber band, you can see how it's stretched. So it takes it up a notch, it elaborates, and that's how you would do for an extended metaphor. You start with a metaphor and then you provide further elaboration with using word plays to extend that metaphor. If you have any questions or comments, please email me. Here are some credits to the presentation template by Slides Carnival and photographs by Unsplash. And here are some further reading for your enjoyment. So if you enjoyed the poem by Emily Dickinson, please read more of her work through this website. And if you're interested in Simplexity, there's a link to the book. Thank you.